Hello everyone, I'm Kevin. I've been playing electronic music since 2004 when I first purchased a Korg Micro Korg. Since 2021, I've been performing live techno and house music as Astro Palace. And after I finished a show last year, I was tired of constantly plugging and unplugging cables and turning things on and off. So I decided to purchase a beautiful flight case and minimize my setup and really try to hone in exactly what I wanted to do. So after I got this case and after I finalized my setup, I was really proud of the work. So I kind of figured I should show it off. And, you know, if I saw a video like this back when I started, you know, before I really understood MIDI, before I really understood what instruments I wanted to do what, you know, it might have helped me save a lot of time. So what are my main goals while playing live techno? Well, my main priority is to be able to just turn on everything and jam. So I have a family, I have a full-time job. I can't really spend a lot of time, you know, selecting presets or doing sound design. I don't have time to do a lot of arranging. You know, I just want to get up and jam. So that's my main priority. The next thing is live drumming. So I am a live drummer by trade. I love playing drums, so I have a drum pad that I also like to jam on. So that's one thing. The next thing is building sequences. I love, you know, just kind of like picking and choosing, you know, sequences or loops or pre-recorded things, mixing and matching and building something live that I've never heard before or will ever hear again, really. And then the last thing is that if I've done actually a song that I'm really proud of, how can I replay it live? First, let's go through all of the kind of gear in order. So first I have 3 synthesizers. First is the Roland JX-08. And that is a bitimbral synth that allows you to play 2 different parts at once. So you can easily have 2 different sounds going on, you know, play pads on one and leads on the other. So that's really nice. The next is the my favorite synth, probably that I own, is probably the Korg Monologue. And that is a monophonic synthesizer that I typically use for bass parts. I'm not a very good keyboard player, as you can probably tell, and I mainly use it for sequencing, and that is something that is incredibly important to be able to pre-sequence items if you can't play them live, or in case you're just doing so much stuff that you need to be able to, you know, have essentially 4 hands or 6 hands or 8 hands. That's what like pre-sequencing is all about. Lastly, I have the Hydrasynth. The Hydrasynth is a great synthesizer for those who don't really have good keyboard playing chops because it allows you to use the pads. And that's what I mainly use it for, is leads, pads, you know, solos, improv work, things like that. I love the Hydrasynth for that. Next are the drums. So for drums, I have 2.5 drum machines that I use. Mainly, the first is the Roland TR-8S. TR-8S, it's got a lot of classic Roland sounds, you know, the 808, 909. I like the 727, all the Latin stuff a lot. I love all the percussion. I use that not just for the classic sounds, not just for the sampling, that you can, you know, import samples into it and then be able to play those. But I love the sidechain feature in terms of producing or processing internal audio input, and we'll get to that in a second for the audio routing. Next, after that drum machine, we go to the Akai Force. I use this for a lot of things, and I'll go into detail in a second, but I also use this as a drum machine, so mainly use this as a hardware sequencer to sequence all the gear, but I do use it a lot for a lot of internal drum sounds. So in a lot of the low end stuff, any deep kick things, you know, all that is pre-sequenced and pretty much kind of flattened, if you will. You know, I don't do a lot of improv on this machine itself, but I do more improv on the other things. Lastly, in terms of drum machines, I have a drum pad that I simply use. I don't know where my drumsticks are right now. And I use this for a lot of just kind of drum work. I typically just always have a drumstick in my right hand while I'm kind of maneuvering everything. Now, those are the 2.5 drum pads. Those are the synthesizers. Those are the drums. The last thing that in terms of actual things that you hear is this Korg Chaos Pad KP3+, and that has a lot of onboard effects. I use it for a lot of movement. I use it for the white noise, a lot of delays, a lot of dub delays, and all the I would say about half of the sound that you would hear in my set actually gets routed through this, allowing me to be able to manipulate it and further do live improv type stuff. All of my video work is all based on the Sleepy Circuit Hypno, and this is essentially a 2-oscillator video synthesizer that outputs its signal natively in HDMI. That goes to a tiny display, allowing me to see what the output is and allowing me to manipulate it in real time and do whatever I would like to. Now, it's also doing live video, as you can see, and that is because I have a webcam that's hooked up to it. All the audio is then routed into the Mackie 802 mixer. That's basically as simple as it gets, and that just kind of goes the main outs. Easy peasy for that. And then lastly, the things that you probably don't see here are a USB splitter, a MIDI splitter, and an HDMI splitter. So those are the 3 main things that are not really visible. They're kind of tucked away here, as well as all the power cables. Lastly, the main reason why I got this video was because of this flight case right here. It's been great so far for shows. It is from roadcases.com. Big ups to them. Okay, now that I went over each piece of hardware, it's really in how these are all interconnected and how they work is the tricky part. So let me show you in a much simpler fashion what this setup looks like with just a bunch of square boxes. This shows all of the synthesizers in red, all of the drums in orangish, and all of the video stuff in purple. The Korg effects box is in green. In terms of audio routing, working backwards from the main outs, it's a simple main 1/4 inch out from the mixers or XLR outs. So that's nice. As going to any show, all I have to do is either hand them 2 1/4 inches or say, give me 2 1/4 inches, and then I'm ready to roll. Everything else is pretty much locked solid except for the Hydrasynth and drum pad. They're not located in the flight case. I just have a few simple cables to plug it in, and then they're ready to roll. So with the mixer, that essentially has 4 main channels that's going into the drum pad, the Akai Force family, the TR-8S, and also the Hydrasynth and a microphone, which is not shown here. The Roland JX-08 and Korg Monologue are sending their signals into the Akai Force, which is in turn sending its audio signal into the Korg KP3. That was where I can manipulate things, put in effects I want to, and then that just goes directly into the mixer. Now, the Roland also has an amazing built-in effects suite for incoming audio. Well, I mean, amazing may be a stretch, but I like it, so it's good enough for me. And I love using the sidechain feature because then on the mixer, I essentially send the auxiliary outs of anything I want to the TR-8S, and then kind of reduce the volume directly on the mixer, allowing the whole mix to essentially get routed a little bit through the TR-8S, gluing it together with the built-in compressors. So that's a neat little trick that I like to use. And also it eliminates the need for a separate hardware compressor. Now, in terms of the video is much simpler. The Sleepy Circuit Hypno simply outputs an HDMI output, and then that goes to a video splitter. That video splitter goes to my display inside the case, and then that gets routed to any projectors or anything else I need. Now, if audio wasn't complicated enough for doing hardware electronic music, the control signals are a little bit more important. Now, the Akai Force is really the whole brains of the operation. The Akai Force allows me to sequence all of the gear as well as improv directly on the machine without the need for, really anything else. The Force then sends out the master clock signal to a USB splitter as well as a MIDI splitter, and then that gets routed to various gear. The only kind of daisy chain that I have going on is the MIDI signal going from the splitter into the JX-08 and then out of it and then into the TR-8S. From the TR-8S, I use a trigger output for just a simple CV trigger to the Hypno to be able to manipulate that in real time. The only other CV that I have going on is from the Force. I use it for some envelopes and some LFOs to manipulate the Hypno as well. With the USB, I like to have the Korg monologue and the Hydrasynth to be able to sync with USB because I like to have bidirectional MIDI functionality, be able to have the Korg control the Force, have the Hydrasynth control the Korg, etc., etc. And that's really nice to be able to use the Hydrasynth pads on all the other gear live. I do not like to have the TR-8S connected via USB and have bidirectional functionality because I don't want it to introduce additional signal interference. I don't want it adding more MIDI data into the data chain when it's not needed. Now let me go ahead and break down the main brains of the operation. Now the Akai Force is my chosen sequencer sampler of the day. It is based on some MPC software and hardware, but regardless of what type of hardware sequencer you choose, or even a kind of a laptop hybrid setup, these are just how I personally have things done. I try to maintain everything on one page. I have mine arranged in columns where the first page, the main page, is essentially all of the things that I would need to perform live where I would need to switch if I didn't need to. So in the first two, I have my main drums. The next three are MIDI channels where I'm sending to my external gear. The next two are internal synth sounds that the Force is capable of. And then the 8th channel is the Hydrasynth. I have it on this 8th one right here because if I don't play the Hydrasynth live, if I choose not to take it out with me, all I simply do is I just move this to a different slot on the screen so I have more usable screen real estate. Now from moving over, I have more items going on that I may not necessarily need. So I have program changes for my TR-8S, followed by program changes and MIDI control for the Hypno, followed by 2 slots that I can do for performing loops, or if I want to do kind of like a hybrid DJ set, I could load files there. I have my CV signal, which is altering the Hypno live, and then lastly, I have a bunch more that is other MIDI gear that is not connected. So if I wanted to play additional gear, or if I wrote additional parts to a song, instead of deleting it or saving it to a different file, I simply just move it out of the way and mute it so I never have to worry about it. So now I'm going to break out the tips into kind of 2 main groups. The first group is tips for setting things up and velcroing things down, and just the setup process of how you may want to connect your gear and tips for that. And then the second thing is actually performing live. What things have I learned from doing live techno, and what things can I pass on to you? So first and foremost, as you are setting up, if you plan to play shows, I can't stress this enough, try to find a way to limit the amount of times you have to connect and disconnect something, because every single time you do that, that is additional time it takes for you to do it when you are setting up for a show. So if you have minimal setup time, then you can set up faster, sound check better, and then go grab yourself a drink and kind of relax instead of just worrying about is the cable connected to the right one. Next, label your power chords, label your MIDI chords, label your audio chords. If you don't have unique ones that are color-coded or something, put some electrical tape on it, put some masking tape on it, anything at all, because if you do have to disconnect something, you want to be able to plug it in as soon as possible. So the drum pad and the Hydrasynth, those, since they're not in the flight case, I have all those in a separate box, all separately labeled. So if I do a show and I bring both of those, then it's essentially just one additional box on top of what this flight case is. Next, when you are learning your gear, you need to learn how to do program changes with all the gear simultaneously. If you don't know what a program change is, it is a MIDI signal sent from a hardware sequencer or a device. In my case, it is the Force, and that essentially sends a message to all the other machines to move to a different patch, to move to a different sound. So it's very, very easy for me to trigger program changes on everything, including the Roland TR-8S, to be able to quickly change all the sounds instead of trying to manipulate things live. The second reason why program changes are really, really good is because when you are creating music and you are not, you're not playing live, but you are actually trying to create something new, or you want to pick up where you left off last time, program changes allow you to essentially have a save point and be able to reload that save point very, very quickly.
Now the next tip, if you have a device that has the ability to show a display such as the monologue or the TR-8S, always make sure to label your patches. If possible, even put the key of the song or the BPM in the patch. That way it's one less thing to have to carry around in your head. I typically just have name of the song and then the key on that and then the BPM. I just always have as a label inside here on some of the clips for the Force. The next thing is that if you are using a hardware sequencer, anything at all that's using MIDI, you have to realize that this technology was based back in the early 80s. And although it's fantastic that we're still using it now, there are serious limitations, and that comes with data overloading. If you have a lot of MIDI CC messages, program changes, notes going on and off, all on the first note of the beat, there is going to be a latency when those bits get to the respective information or the respective machine. So what I tend to do is no CC messages whatsoever. I try to limit the amount of messages going out. So just be mindful of how you're connecting things and how much information is being transferred. If your gear has the ability to do a MIDI through, such as the JX-08, I would suggest taking advantage of it because it's one less thing that your main hardware sequencer has to send out. So this MIDI clock, for instance, only sends to one MIDI hub. That MIDI hub then goes to the JX-08. That clock then goes to the TR-8S. So it is a daisy chain, and you need to be also mindful of to not daisy chain too far to where there is going to be signal degradation. The last tip that I have for setting up is that if you mainly use an external sequencer to be the main brain of the operation, don't neglect your gear's internal sequencers. Your gear has these internal sequencers, and they typically also have like mod lanes or the ability to modify the sound in real time. So you can play notes from the external sequencer, but then modify the values with the internal sequencer. One fun thing that I like to do while playing live is to have these sequencers kind of battle each other in real time, like on a monophonic synth, because then you have this kind of fun note stealing happening in real time. And if you add a delay and some reverb to it, then it sounds really. Now, here are some tips that I have for playing live. You want to separate your sessions into 2 sessions. The first type of sessions are what I call A sessions, and that is jamming and practicing and songwriting. So it's just playing your instruments. It's all it basically is. Your B sessions are everything else. It's your sound design. It's your patch naming. It's your rearranging of files. It is, putting in program change messages or manipulating or improving or evolving existing material. So if you're in this creative state of an A session where you're just jamming and jamming and jamming, you don't want to pause things to rename things, move files around, search for that perfect snare sound or whatever else. Alternatively, if you are just focused on, tasks and homework, if you will, don't get yourself distracted by playing and jamming, even though that is by far the more fun way to spend your time. When I am playing live, I have a workflow that I really like to do. I am a drummer by trade, so typically I have a sparse beat that's playing either on the Akai Force and the TR-8S, and then I do live jamming on the drum pad. After I am tired of jamming on that, I then begin to trigger additional MIDI clips on the Force to add in pads or add in leads or solos and begin to build a song from there. Lastly, as soon as I'm just tired of jamming and I just want to play a song, I just trigger this launch on the Force, which triggers an entire row. Everything's pretty much automatic and it's just kind of rolling, and then I can just kind of dance and get my bearings before I just rinse, wash, and repeat. So essentially when I go to the next song, I then start to take out elements and then I go back to the drum pad. The next tip is, and this should be, pretty self-explanatory, but really know your gear well. If you buy something and you plan to play it live and you want to manipulate it live, you want to make sure you know what things you like to manipulate live. So if it's the cutoff frequency, if it's the LFO intensity, if it's the effects live, make sure you know how to execute it live, and don't just go fiddling with knobs randomly, because you want to make sure that it's comfortable and it all feels natural. We're talking about effects, and I want to make sure that I emphasize how important effects are for your gear to be able to build movement. So if you are struggling with going from one loop to another and it just sounds jarring and you're just all of a sudden there's no real transition element, a lot of effects can help build that transition. I use the Chaos pad a lot for that. I also use a lot of macros on the Force as well as the built-in effects on the TR-8S to do movement. Speaking of additional movement, one thing I would suggest purchasing is an expression pedal or a sustain pedal. You have 2 feet, and most of the time all they're doing is just tapping along to the beat. Now my favorite tip, or at least the thing that really kicked off Astro Palace, is find a way to integrate visuals into your set. I originally purchased some Nanoleaf triangles that had a built-in microphone, and then I've evolved into the Hypno, which allows me to do a lot of manipulation in real time. And once again, I have another video that goes into the detail of just that. If you incorporate visuals into your setup, even if it's just for you, it just adds a much more visceral experience when you see a flashing light or a light change on every quarter note. So it's super fun, and even if you were to just go purchase a cheap Amazon light, it's fun. I think it's important. So your mileage may vary. That's really an overview of the Astro Palace live setup and how I conduct things live. I hope that this was informative, and if you guys have any questions, hit me up. Thanks.